I build communities online, and I talk to people, lots of people, online. So this is new. My name is Jay, and I'm a TCK. A TCK also means third culture kids. And a third culture kid is someone who has lived somewhere else for a longer period of time than their parents' passport countries. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I'm from the Philippines. I was born there. But when I was 3, I moved to Guangzhou. And then at 7 to Beijing for my dad's job. And then at 18, I moved to Hong Kong. And then at 20 to London. And I moved there for university. And that's where I currently live today. Both of my parents are Filipino, but because of my upbringing of constantly moving around so much, I don't consider the Philippines my home. Dr. Ruth Hill Useem coined the term third culture kids. There have been several TEDx talks and TED Talks that have been relevant to third culture kids, and there have been lots of third culture kid books explaining what a third culture kid is. So today, I'm not going to be talking to you about the definition of a third culture kid. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about the problems that third culture kids face. Now, third culture kids deal with so many of the same problems that we have our own hashtags for them. The biggest third culture kid problem is that almost no one knows what we are. And this is because the term hasn't been normalized. So because the term's not normalized and because almost no one knows what we are unless they have done some research on third culture kids or maybe they've met one before, it makes it difficult for us to connect to people. And this is because of the complicated introductions that we have upon meeting new people. To help you understand, just imagine that the UK was a place that no one knew really existed. And then imagine trying to explain to someone who was asking you where you're from by saying you're from London. This person has no idea where London is or that it even exists. That's what I feel like when someone asks me where I'm from or where home is. There are 2 scenarios that happen when someone asks me this question, where are you from? In the first scenario, someone asks me this question and I answer, I'm a third culture kid. But see, this person doesn't know what a third culture kid is. To them, I sound like I'm saying, I'm from ka-ka-ka-ka. They think I'm speaking gibberish and they just don't get it. And in scenario 2, someone asks me where I'm from, and instead of telling them anything, I just stand there in silence, debating in my own head, thinking, I could say I'm from the Philippines because I was born there, but I haven't lived there in so long that I don't know what people my age do there anymore, so I'm not going to say I'm from there. I can't say I'm from Guangzhou or Hong Kong because, well, I haven't lived in those places for long enough to call them home. And I guess I could say Beijing because I've lived there for 12 years of my upbringing and I have a lot of wonderful memories from that place. But if I wanted to go back there today, I need this special piece of paper called a tourist visa. And this tourist visa only lets me stay there for 3 months at a time max if I'm lucky. And even if I did call that place my home, my parents just recently relocated back to the Philippines from the Beijing. So technically, I wouldn't have a home to go home to in that home. And I could say London, since I've been living there for the past 4 years. But I have a Tier 1 visa, not a Tier 2, where they let you stay here for 3 years and then extend it to 5. For a Tier 1, you need to do something super awesome every year to not get deported the next year. So I can't say either of those places. And because of that, I end up telling this person asking me where I'm from, one of these places where I don't believe I'm from, and that creates a disconnection. The next third culture kid problem is a lack of sense of belonging. So this occurs because of the first third culture kid problem of the term not being normalized. See, when the term isn't normalized and very few people know what we are, it makes it difficult for third culture kids to find other third culture kids, and for even some third culture kids to know that they are one. And when you can't find people who are like you, or when you don't know what type of person you are and therefore don't know that there are others out there like you, it makes it difficult to find a sense of belonging. Why is this? Can you imagine feeling like a foreigner in your own home country? I can. When I go back to the Philippines, I'm constantly questioned about where I'm from. So I talk to Filipinos over there and they're like, so where are you from? And then I'm like, I'm from here. And they're like, no, you're not. You're American. Your accent's American. And then I'm like, no, I'm not. Then I try and explain my upbringing in China, and then they automatically say, well, then you're ABC, which is short for American-born Chinese. And I'm like, dude, let it go. Not. So over there, I really never feel at home. I'm not the only one that feels this way. Most, if not all, third culture kids do too. It's kind of like feeling like a foreigner everywhere. So when I found out about my community, I felt relief that I belonged and relief that I was normal and that I wasn't the only one. And I felt lots of relief that there was nothing wrong with me, because I used to think that it was just me. It was kind of like feeling, for example, like I was French and I was in Beijing and I didn't know that I was French, and then all of a sudden I found out I was French, and then I met a bunch of other French people. It was really nice to feel a sense of home. The way I found out about my community started when I was in Hong Kong. So this was a couple of years ago. I actually went through depression because I didn't have a sense of belonging for a long period of time. And Hong Kong was the first place I moved to since living in Beijing. And in Beijing, it was filled with international schools, and I was surrounded by third culture kids. So after moving from Beijing and living in Hong Kong, that was really the first time people started asking me where I was from and where home was, and all of these questions that they asked just so that they could try and get to know me. And it was the first time that I realized I didn't have a simple answer to any of these questions, and I didn't really know how to answer some of them. So I started to talk to my best friend about this to see how she felt. My best friend is Swedish, and she relocated back to Sweden after living in Beijing for most of her upbringing. She relocated back to Sweden when she turned 18. Turns out that she felt the same. You see, her Swedish wasn't very good, so she had to learn Swedish being Swedish in Sweden. Not the greatest thing ever. And she had a lot of things that she did in China that she wanted to bring back to Sweden, like celebrate Chinese New Year's, except she did this in Sweden with Swedish people. So she also felt like an outcast in her home country. And I thought after a couple of years, I was like, well, I can't be the only person feeling like this, and neither can my best friend and I, so why not ask all of my TCK, third culture kid friends? And it turns out that they felt the same too. In fact, so many of them felt so alike and were so felt that this was so important to them that they decided to share their stories with me. And at the time, I couldn't find a place online that was actively dedicated to third culture kids. So I decided to create one. I made this so that I could share all of these stories my friends had sent me, so that other third culture kids could hopefully find this place and find a sense of belonging through reading these stories. After a while, I let this place online allow people to submit their stories. And after collecting so many stories, and after reading all of them, I finally found a sense of belonging through the people that had written these stories, even if I had never met them. And I wanted to give back this sense of belonging to all the third culture kids, as many as I could. So to do this, I pretty much decided that I needed to make way more friends, and I needed these friends to befriend each other. I did that by creating communities online, on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Slack, because that's where all the millennials are at. And on these online communities, I labeled myself as Jay the TCK, in the hopes that other third culture kids could find me online. So this is the equivalent of someone English calling themselves Johnny English to hopefully let people know that he was English so that he could make English friends. It's kind of sad, but it worked. There is a growing number of third culture kids today because of the ease of relocation and travel. It only takes 1 to 2 days max to get from one side of the world to the other. In 2016, there were 8,000 international schools, and in these international schools were over 4 million international students that were taught in English as their first language, and most of these students were third culture kids. So just imagine the number of third culture kids there are if you think about the ones that go to international schools that don't use English as their first language, or the ones that are homeschooled, or the ones that have grown up to be adult third culture kids. There are so many of us. And in 2026, these numbers are estimated to double. Today, people travel for work, people travel for pleasure, people travel for majority of other things. And long distance relationships are way more than possible. In fact, my best friend and I have been doing long distance for over 6 years now. People marry people from other nations, and people find homes in countries not of their own. Globalization is not just affecting how we live, but who we are. Because the number of third culture kids is growing exponentially, we can't ignore the term anymore, and I think it's time that we normalize it. Because by doing this, it's going to help third culture kids find a sense of belonging. So how do I know that by normalizing the term, it's going to help them find a sense of belonging? Well, they tell me on my online channels, and they actively do things that help normalize the term so that hopefully other third culture kids can find this sense of belonging through this community. For example, this is my YouTube channel, and on there, third culture kids have asked to put up their own videos and tell their stories in the hopes that other third culture kids can find these stories and find the sense of home in this community. On my Slack channel, I have done my very best to normalize the term third culture kid. And because of that, we were able to jump on this call, and believe it or not, this is a group of strangers talking to each other, and this call lasted for 2 hours because we could find that sense of home within each other. They send me thank you messages for creating the community and for allowing them to find a piece of home online. So you might be wondering what you can do as non-third culture kids. You can be aware and be accepting of the term because it's going to help normalize it. A third culture kid doesn't like to answer the question, where are you from, because of the complicated answer that we end up giving you. And this often causes a disconnection. So by being aware and accepting of the term, it will help normalize it. And once the term is normalized, this will allow third culture kids to feel accepted in conversations and have an easier time integrating into countries of their own and not of their own, and it will stop them from feeling like an outsider. And if you happen to meet a third culture kid that doesn't know that they are one, then obviously, please let them know. What I want all of you to take from this today is to be aware that third culture kids exist, to be mindful of their upbringings and complicated backgrounds, to make sure that no matter what you do, you don't judge them for who they are. Thank you.